In the quiet farming town of Phillipsburg, Pennsylvania, life moved at a pace that felt worlds away from the chaos of New York City. The streets were calm. The people knew one another. Church bells echoed through neighborhoods where families gathered each Sunday, and the dangers that haunted America's largest cities seemed distant and unreal. It was in this peaceful setting that a young pastor named David Wilkerson lived and ministered. He was dedicated to his congregation, committed to preaching the gospel, and content serving in a small community. By all appearances, his future seemed predictable. He would continue pastoring, continue serving his church, and continue living a life far removed from the violence that dominated newspaper headlines. But everything changed one ordinary day in 1958. David was sitting in his home, flipping through the pages of Life magazine. It was a routine moment, one that seemed insignificant at first. Then his eyes landed on a photograph that immediately captured his attention. The image showed 7 teenage boys standing trial in New York City. They were members of a gang accused of brutally murdering a disabled teenager named Michael Farmer. The faces of the boys stared back at him from the page. Most readers saw criminals. Most readers saw a shocking crime story. David saw something different. As he looked at the photograph, he later recalled feeling overwhelmed by a sudden and unexpected burden. He could not explain it. He could not rationalize it. But he felt compelled to pray for those young men. The feeling would not leave him. Day after day, he found himself thinking about the teenagers in the photograph. Their lives, their choices, and their futures occupied his mind. While others condemned them, David wondered whether anyone had ever truly reached out to them with compassion. The burden grew stronger. Soon, what began as concern became conviction. David believed God was calling him to go to New York City and personally speak to the boys. The idea sounded absurd. He had no connections in New York. He had no experience working with gangs. He had no influence in the city's legal system. He had no invitation. Yet the conviction remained. Friends questioned his decision. Fellow ministers struggled to understand. Why would a small-town pastor travel hundreds of miles to meet accused murderers he had never met? The answer was simple. David believed God had spoken. Eventually, unable to ignore the call any longer, he drove to New York. The city he encountered was unlike anything he had known. The late 1950s were a turbulent period in New York. Poverty, racial tension, overcrowding, and juvenile delinquency were becoming major concerns. Entire neighborhoods were struggling. Gang violence was spreading through parts of the city, particularly in areas of Brooklyn and the Bronx. For a pastor accustomed to rural Pennsylvania, the environment was overwhelming. Towering buildings stretched into the sky. Traffic roared through packed streets. Crowds moved in every direction. Yet David remained focused on his mission. He made his way to the courthouse where the trial was taking place, convinced that somehow he would be able to speak with the defendants. What happened next would become one of the most famous moments of his life. Without understanding courtroom procedures or legal restrictions, David attempted to approach the defendants directly. The effort failed immediately. Court officials stopped him. Reporters noticed the unusual pastor trying to gain access to the accused gang members. Before long, cameras were pointed in his direction. Questions were asked. Who was this man? Why was he there? What did he hope to accomplish? David's answers, though sincere, came across awkwardly under pressure. The resulting newspaper coverage was humiliating. Headlines portrayed him as a strange preacher who had interrupted a major murder trial. Photographs captured an uncomfortable moment that quickly became public embarrassment. Back home, many people would have viewed the experience as a sign to quit. After all, the trip had accomplished nothing. He had not met the boys. He had not delivered his message. He had become the subject of ridicule. The logical response would have been to return home and forget the entire episode. But David could not shake the conviction that his journey was not over. What appeared to be failure was actually the beginning. The newspaper coverage that embarrassed him also introduced his name to people throughout New York's troubled neighborhoods. Unexpected doors began to open. Opportunities appeared where none had existed before. Most importantly, David started encountering the young people who lived in the very environments he had felt called to reach. The more he learned, the more he realized the situation was far worse than he had imagined. Many teenagers were growing up surrounded by violence. Broken homes were common. Drug use was increasing. Street gangs offered belonging, identity, protection, and purpose to young people who felt abandoned by society. To outsiders, gang members looked frightening. To David, they increasingly looked lost. He began visiting neighborhoods that most people avoided. The streets were controlled by powerful gangs with names that inspired fear across the city. Fights erupted regularly. Weapons were common. Territories were fiercely defended. Entering these environments as an outsider was dangerous enough. Entering them as a preacher seemed almost impossible. Yet David continued moving forward. Something deep inside convinced him that God cared about the very people others considered unreachable. As he walked through unfamiliar streets, he encountered young men hardened by violence and shaped by years of anger. Many had learned to trust no one. Many viewed authority figures as enemies. Many had never heard a message of hope that felt relevant to their lives. David was stepping into a world where sermons alone would not be enough. If he wanted to reach these young people, he would have to earn their trust. And earning that trust could cost him far more than his reputation. Soon, he would come face to face with some of the most feared gangs in America. He would walk into neighborhoods where police officers entered cautiously. He would stand before gang leaders whose names commanded respect and fear throughout the streets of New York. And before long, one encounter with a notorious gang member would change not only David Wilkerson's life, but the lives of thousands of young people across the nation. What began with a photograph in a magazine was about to become a mission that would carry him into the heart of America's most violent streets. And the Bronx was waiting. By the time David Wilkerson returned to New York, he understood something he had not fully grasped during his first visit. The city was not merely struggling with crime. It was experiencing a crisis of hopelessness. Entire neighborhoods were trapped in cycles of poverty, violence, and despair. Thousands of young people felt abandoned by their families, ignored by society, and forgotten by the institutions that were supposed to help them. For many teenagers, gangs had become more than criminal organizations. They had become surrogate families. The streets provided what broken homes often could not: protection, identity, purpose, belonging. And nowhere was this reality more visible than in the boroughs where gang culture had become deeply rooted. David began spending more time in these neighborhoods. He walked streets that many outsiders feared. He listened to stories that few people wanted to hear. He met teenagers whose lives had been shaped by neglect, abuse, and violence from an early age. The more he listened, the more he realized that many gang members were not born violent. They had become violent. Their anger had been cultivated over years of rejection and pain. Some had grown up without fathers. Others had experienced physical abuse. Many had witnessed crime and violence so frequently that it seemed normal. What shocked David most was not the toughness of these young people. It was the loneliness behind their toughness. Behind the threatening appearances, the aggressive language, and the hardened expressions were teenagers desperately searching for significance. Yet reaching them would require extraordinary courage. Many churches avoided these neighborhoods. Many community leaders had given up on the gangs altogether. Some people believed the gang members were beyond redemption. David refused to accept that conclusion. He believed no one was beyond God's reach. That conviction would soon bring him face to face with one of the most feared gang leaders in New York City. His name was Nicky Cruz. Long before becoming known around the world, Nicky was a young man consumed by rage. Born in Puerto Rico, he grew up in a deeply troubled environment. His parents were involved in occult practices and frequently subjected him to emotional and physical abuse. Instead of receiving love and affirmation, Nicky was repeatedly told that he was unwanted. The words cut deeply. As a child, he learned to survive by building emotional walls. Pain became anger. Anger became violence. Violence became identity. Eventually, Nicky was sent to live with relatives in New York City. The move did not improve his situation. Instead, he found himself navigating unfamiliar streets, facing isolation, rejection, and constant hostility. The anger that had been growing inside him exploded. He quickly became involved in gang culture. Before long, he joined a gang known as the Mau Maus. The Mau Maus were among the most feared gangs in New York. Their reputation was built on violence. Fights, robberies, assaults, and intimidation were part of daily life. To survive within the gang, members needed to project strength at all times. Weakness was dangerous. Fear was unacceptable. Mercy was almost non-existent. Nicky excelled in this environment. His toughness earned respect. His willingness to fight earned status. His unpredictability made him feared. Eventually, he rose through the ranks and became the leader of the Mau Maus. By the time David Wilkerson heard about him, Nicky Cruz had become a name that carried weight throughout gang-controlled neighborhoods. People knew who he was. People feared what he was capable of. And David felt drawn to him. To most observers, that decision made no sense. Why seek out one of the city's most dangerous gang leaders? Why risk personal safety for someone who appeared committed to violence? David's answer remained unchanged. He believed every person mattered to God. No exceptions. One day, he attended a gang gathering where numerous members had assembled. The atmosphere was tense. Many gang members viewed outsiders with suspicion. A preacher entering their territory was not exactly welcome. David stood before young men who had little reason to trust him. Some mocked him. Others laughed. A few openly threatened him. Yet he continued speaking. He talked about hope. He talked about forgiveness. Most importantly, he talked about God's love. The message was met with hostility. For gang members accustomed to violence and survival, such words seemed weak. Nicky Cruz was especially unimpressed. As the gang leader listened, his irritation grew. Everything about David appeared foolish. The preacher was small, soft-spoken, unarmed, completely out of place. At one point, Nicky confronted him directly. Accounts of the encounter have become legendary. According to David's later retellings, Nicky threatened him and made it clear that violence could come at any moment. The young gang leader wanted to intimidate him. He wanted the preacher to be afraid. Instead, David responded with words that would become famous. He told Nicky that he could cut him into 1,000 pieces and scatter those pieces across the streets, but every piece would still love him. The statement stunned everyone present. Gang members understood fear. They understood retaliation. They understood threats. What they did not understand was unconditional love. David's response did not fit the rules of the street. For a moment, Nicky was caught off guard. He masked it with anger. But something about the encounter stayed with him. The preacher had not backed down. He had not responded with aggression. He had not run away. He had looked directly at one of New York's most feared gang leaders and spoken words of compassion. That was unfamiliar territory. David continued returning. Again and again. He attended gatherings. He met gang members. He listened to their stories. He earned trust slowly. Progress was frustratingly slow. Some meetings ended badly. Some gang members mocked him relentlessly. Others ignored him altogether. There were moments when the mission seemed impossible. Yet David remained convinced that breakthrough was coming. The seeds were being planted. Even when there was no visible evidence. Even when the streets appeared unchanged. Even when gang violence continued. Meanwhile, Nicky found himself increasingly troubled. He tried to dismiss the preacher. He tried to ignore the message. But the words lingered. Why would someone risk his life for people he barely knew? Why would someone keep returning after being threatened? Why would someone care about gang members that society had already written off? The questions followed him. Beneath his reputation for toughness, a battle was beginning. The anger that had defined his life for years was colliding with something entirely new. Hope. Though he would never admit it publicly, cracks were beginning to form in the walls he had spent years building. David sensed it. He believed that beneath Nicky's violent exterior was a young man desperately searching for meaning. But reaching him would require more than a single conversation. It would require persistence. It would require courage. And it would require one dramatic event that would bring hundreds of gang members together under circumstances no one could have predicted. Soon, David Wilkerson would organize a gathering unlike anything New York's gangs had ever witnessed. Gang leaders from rival groups would attend. Tensions would run high. Violence could erupt at any moment. Police were concerned. Observers were skeptical. Many believed the event would end in disaster. Instead, it would become the turning point that changed Nicky Cruz forever and launched one of the most remarkable stories of transformation in modern Christian history. The confrontation between the preacher and the gang leader was far from over. In fact, the most important chapter was only beginning. The months following David Wilkerson's first encounters with New York's gangs were filled with uncertainty. On the surface, very little seemed to be changing. The violence continued. The gang rivalries remained intense. Young men still carried weapons. Fights still erupted in the streets. Many people watching from the outside concluded that David's efforts were accomplishing little. After all, what chance did one small-town preacher have against deeply rooted gang culture? The gangs had influence. The gangs had loyalty. The gangs had power. David had only a message. Yet history has repeatedly shown that ideas can be stronger than force. And David believed the gospel was more powerful than any gang. As he continued visiting neighborhoods throughout New York City, he developed relationships with gang members from numerous groups. Some listened politely. Others openly mocked him. A few attended meetings simply out of curiosity. But underneath the resistance, something was happening. Young people who had spent years feeling unwanted were hearing a message they had rarely encountered before. They were hearing that their lives had value. They were hearing that their past did not have to determine their future. They were hearing that redemption was possible. For many, the idea seemed unbelievable. They had been labeled criminals, troublemakers, delinquents, lost causes. Now a preacher was telling them they could become something different. The message challenged everything they believed about themselves. David knew that if these young people were ever going to experience transformation, they needed an opportunity to hear the message in a larger setting. He began planning a major evangelistic event. It was an ambitious idea. Perhaps even reckless. The goal was to bring together gang members from various neighborhoods and present the gospel on a scale never attempted before. The risks were obvious. Rival gangs often viewed each other as enemies. Bringing them into the same environment could create explosive tension. Violence was a real possibility. Some people warned David not to proceed. Others questioned his judgment. Still others predicted complete failure. David listened respectfully. Then he moved forward anyway. He had become convinced that fear could not dictate the mission. If the gangs were willing to gather, he was willing to preach. Eventually, plans were finalized for a large rally. The event would take place in a setting capable of accommodating hundreds of young people. Word spread quickly through the streets. Gang members talked. Curiosity grew. Some attended because they genuinely wanted answers. Others came because they wanted entertainment. Many arrived with no intention of changing at all. Among them was Nicky Cruz. By this point, Nicky had heard David speak multiple times. He knew the preacher's message. He knew the preacher's persistence. He also knew he could not completely dismiss him. Something about David continued to unsettle him. The preacher's courage made no sense. His compassion made no sense. His willingness to love people who threatened him made no sense. And yet, despite all his efforts to ignore it, Nicky found himself drawn back again and again. When the night of the rally arrived, anticipation filled the air. The crowd included gang members from different neighborhoods. Some were armed. Some were suspicious. Many were skeptical. Observers wondered whether the gathering would remain peaceful. The atmosphere felt charged. David understood the stakes. One wrong move could create chaos. One confrontation could derail everything. Yet he remained calm. As the event began, music filled the venue. Testimonies were shared. Messages of hope were delivered. The audience listened with varying degrees of interest. Some paid close attention. Others sat with folded arms. A few appeared openly hostile. Then came the moment David had been preparing for. He stepped forward to deliver his message. It was not a complicated sermon. It was not built around sophisticated theology. It focused on something much simpler. God's love. God's forgiveness. God's power to transform lives. As he spoke, he addressed realities the audience understood firsthand. Violence. Hatred. Fear. Loneliness. Brokenness. He spoke about wounds hidden beneath tough exteriors. He spoke about pain disguised as anger. He spoke about the emptiness that often remained after every fight had been won. Many listeners shifted uneasily. The words felt personal. Too personal. For Nicky Cruz, the experience became increasingly uncomfortable. Throughout his life, he had built emotional defenses designed to keep others out. The walls had protected him from disappointment. Protected him from rejection. Protected him from vulnerability. But now those walls were beginning to crack. As David continued speaking, Nicky felt emotions he had spent years suppressing. Memories surfaced. Pain resurfaced. Questions resurfaced. What if there was another way to live? What if his life did not have to be defined by violence? What if the preacher was telling the truth? The battle inside him intensified. Part of him wanted to reject the message completely. Part of him wanted to walk away. Part of him wanted to maintain the image he had spent years building. After all, he was Nicky Cruz, leader of the Mau Maus, feared throughout the streets. People looked up to him. People followed him. People expected strength. Admitting weakness felt impossible. Yet another part of him was exhausted. Exhausted from anger. Exhausted from hatred. Exhausted from carrying wounds that never seemed to heal. As the invitation was given for people to respond, an internal struggle reached its climax. The room seemed to fade into the background. The noise disappeared. The crowd disappeared. The only thing that mattered was the choice standing before him. For years, he had been running. Running from pain. Running from truth. Running from the possibility that he could become something different. Now he could run no longer. In one of the most remarkable moments of his life, Nicky Cruz made a decision. He surrendered. The feared gang leader broke down emotionally. Years of anger poured out. Years of bitterness surfaced. Years of pain finally confronted the possibility of healing. Those who witnessed the moment could hardly believe what they were seeing. The young man who had terrorized neighborhoods was weeping openly. The gang leader known for violence was embracing a message of forgiveness. The transformation did not happen because someone threatened him. It did not happen because someone forced him. It happened because he encountered a kind of love he had never experienced before. For David Wilkerson, it was a powerful confirmation of everything he had believed from the beginning. No one was beyond redemption. Not even the most feared gang leader in New York. The impact was immediate. Other gang members began responding as well. Some came forward that night. Others followed in the weeks that followed. Stories of transformation spread through neighborhoods where hope had long been absent. Young men who once carried weapons began carrying Bibles. Former rivals began reconciling. Lives that seemed destined for destruction began moving in new directions. The changes were not always instant. The struggles did not disappear overnight. But something undeniable was happening. A movement was emerging. And Nicky Cruz became one of its most visible examples. The former gang leader who had once threatened violence now traveled alongside David, sharing his testimony with audiences throughout the city. Wherever he spoke, people listened. His story carried credibility. No one could accuse him of ignorance. No one could claim he failed to understand street life. He had lived it. He had survived it. And now he was telling others that transformation was possible. The news spread far beyond New York. Newspapers took interest. Churches took notice. Communities paid attention. What began as a burden in the heart of one pastor was growing into something much larger. Yet David understood that this was only the beginning. Saving individual lives was important. But the need extended far beyond a handful of gang members. Thousands of young people across America were facing the same struggles. Thousands needed help. Thousands needed hope. The question now was no longer whether God could transform gang members. The evidence was standing right in front of him. The question was how to reach even more of them. And the answer would lead David Wilkerson to create a ministry that would impact generations, inspire a best-selling book, and leave a legacy that continues to influence lives around the world decades later. The miracle of Nicky Cruz's transformation was only the first chapter of a much bigger story. By the time Nicky Cruz's transformation became widely known, David Wilkerson understood that he was witnessing something much larger than a series of individual conversions. What had begun with a photograph in a magazine had grown into a movement. The streets of New York had shown him a reality he could never unsee. Behind gang violence, drug addiction, and juvenile delinquency were countless young people searching for hope. Many had been abandoned by society. Many had been written off as hopeless cases. Yet again and again, David had witnessed lives transformed when someone took the time to believe they were worth saving. The question now was how to reach more people. The answer would lead to the creation of one of the most influential youth ministries in modern Christian history. In 1960, David founded Teen Challenge. The ministry began with a simple mission, helping troubled young people find freedom from addiction, crime, violence, and destructive lifestyles through faith, mentorship, and structured support. At the time, many experts viewed addiction as nearly impossible to overcome, especially among individuals deeply entrenched in street culture. Drug abuse was becoming an increasingly serious problem throughout major American cities. Heroin addiction, in particular, was devastating communities. Many treatment approaches produced disappointing results. Relapse rates were high. Resources were limited. Hope was often in short supply. David believed something different was possible. He believed that lasting transformation required more than behavior modification. It required a change of heart. Teen Challenge focused on helping individuals rebuild their lives physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Participants were given structure, guidance, accountability, and a supportive community. What made the ministry remarkable was not simply its message. It was its results. Former addicts who had spent years trapped by substance abuse began finding freedom. Former gang members started building productive lives. Young men and women who had once been considered beyond help became living examples of transformation. As stories spread, Teen Challenge expanded. New centers opened. More staff members joined the mission. Communities began noticing the impact. Soon, what started in New York was reaching cities across America. Then it crossed international borders. Over time, Teen Challenge grew into a global ministry operating in numerous countries around the world. Thousands upon thousands of lives were influenced by its programs. For David, this growth served as a reminder of an important truth. One act of obedience can have consequences far beyond what anyone initially imagines. Had he ignored the burden he felt while reading that magazine years earlier, none of it might have happened. No ministry. No movement. No transformed gang leaders. No worldwide outreach. Everything traced back to a simple decision to respond to a calling that seemed irrational at the time. But David's influence did not stop with Teen Challenge. In 1962, his story reached an even larger audience through the publication of a book that would become a Christian classic. The book was titled The Cross and the Switchblade. It chronicled David's experiences in New York, his encounters with gangs, and the remarkable transformation of Nicky Cruz. The title itself captured the contrast at the heart of the story. The cross represented hope, redemption, and faith. The switchblade represented violence, fear, and gang culture. The book resonated with readers around the world. People were captivated by the real-life accounts. The story felt dramatic because it was dramatic. It contained danger, conflict, redemption, miracles. Most importantly, it demonstrated that lives considered hopeless could be changed. Millions of copies were eventually distributed. The book was translated into numerous languages. It inspired missionaries, pastors, youth workers, and ordinary believers to reach people others often overlooked. For countless readers, it was their first introduction to David Wilkerson. It would not be their last. In 1970, the story was adapted into a feature film. The movie introduced the message to an even broader audience. Viewers watched the events unfold on screen and witnessed the powerful journey from gang violence to personal transformation. Once again, the impact extended far beyond New York City. David's message was reaching people across generations and across continents. Yet despite growing recognition, he never viewed fame as the goal. His focus remained on ministry. His focus remained on people. His focus remained on the conviction that no one was beyond God's reach. As the decades passed, David continued serving in various leadership roles. One of his most notable later ministries was the establishment of Times Square Church in New York City during the 1980s. At a time when Times Square was known for crime, pornography, and social decay, David felt another strong calling. He believed God wanted a church planted in the heart of the city. Many considered the idea unrealistic. Others thought it was impractical. But they had heard similar objections before. David moved forward. Times Square Church quickly became known for passionate worship, biblical teaching, and outreach to people from diverse backgrounds. The congregation grew. Lives were changed. And once again, David demonstrated a willingness to go where others hesitated to go. Throughout his ministry, certain themes remained constant. Compassion for the forgotten. Faith in the impossible. Courage in difficult circumstances. A refusal to define people by their worst mistakes. These principles shaped every stage of his life. They shaped his ministry to gang members. They shaped Teen Challenge. They shaped Times Square Church. And they continue shaping countless ministries influenced by his example today. On April 27, 2011, David Wilkerson's earthly journey came to an unexpected end when he was involved in a fatal automobile accident in Texas. He was 79 years old. News of his passing spread quickly. Tributes poured in from around the world. Pastors remembered his leadership. Former addicts remembered the hope he had offered. Former gang members remembered the compassion that changed their lives. Thousands reflected on the legacy he left behind. Yet perhaps the most powerful measure of David Wilkerson's impact cannot be found in statistics, buildings, books, or ministry organizations. It can be found in transformed lives. Lives like Nicky Cruz. Lives that once seemed destined for destruction. Lives that became testimonies of hope. Today, Nicky Cruz continues sharing his story with audiences around the world. His journey remains one of the most remarkable examples of transformation in modern Christian history. And every time his story is told, it points back to an extraordinary truth. One pastor chose to walk into places others feared. One pastor chose to see potential where others saw problems. one pastor chose to believe that even the most violent gang members were not beyond redemption. That belief changed lives. It changed neighborhoods. It changed ministries. And it changed history. David Wilkerson never set out to become famous. He never set out to launch a global movement. He simply responded to a calling. A calling that began with a photograph. A calling that led him into the Bronx. A calling that placed him face to face with America's most violent gangs. And a calling that proved that courage, compassion, and faith can reach people in places where fear says no one should go. Decades later, his story continues to inspire because it reminds us of something the world often forgets. No person is too broken. No past is too dark. No life is beyond hope. And sometimes, the greatest transformations begin when one person is willing to walk into the impossible and believe that change can happen. As David Wilkerson's remarkable journey comes to a close, one truth stands above everything else: ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they choose obedience over fear. What began as a simple glance at a magazine photograph became a mission that transformed countless lives, rescued young people from violence and addiction, and sparked a movement that continues to impact the world today. David dared to walk into places others avoided, not because he was fearless, but because he believed that no one was beyond redemption. His story reminds us that compassion can break through hatred, hope can overcome despair, and love can reach even the hardest heart. The legacy of David Wilkerson and Nicky Cruz stands as powerful proof that transformation is always possible. If this story inspired you, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more powerful true stories, and share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Also, drop a comment below and let us know what part of David Wilkerson's journey impacted you the most.